Good afternoon, everyone. If you could all take your seats. Welcome back. I hope you all feel refreshed after some tea and coffee. My name is Imogen Crane, and I work on the RMF with my colleagues Daniel and Miriam. We're now going to proceed to our final two sessions of the day, and I would like to first welcome the BBC Media Action team. BBC Media Action is the BBC's international charity which works globally to bring people together and foster greater understanding and trust. The team are here today to talk about 25 years of measuring impact, a topic I know many of you are interested to learn more about. Anna Godfrey is Head of Evidence and leads work to understand how programming delivers impact for diverse communities around the world. She is joined by three of her colleagues today. Mahdi Zaki is the Research Manager for the Afghanistan Office and has worked with several think tanks in Afghanistan. Tania Nikitina is a Senior Research Manager in Eastern Europe and Central Asia and has over 2 decades experience working on research and media in Ukraine and a PhD in sociology. And then we have Benedek Paskuj joining us virtually. He is the Quantitative Research Manager supporting the global research team and building links between academia and practice to support evidence-based programming. Over to you, Anna.
Thank you, Imogen, and thanks for inviting us today. We're delighted to be here and talk about measuring impact, which is our day job at BBC Media Action, as we celebrate 25-year anniversary of BBC Media Action. So what does impact mean for BBC's international charity? An organisation that is not directly funded by licence fee, yet an organisation that draws on BBC's values and purpose to inform, to educate and entertain. Well, we measure the impact of our programming on people, communities and media ecosystems. We measure to, most importantly, refine and adapt those programmes and that content to learn as an organisation and also increasingly to contribute to the global evidence base about the impact of public interest content. An evidence base from our own work and others is growing, and particularly around storytelling. And we're going to share some examples of that today. We're increasingly also focused on understanding not just if content has an impact, but also how and why. So in preparing for today, I was actually reflecting on when I first joined BBC Media Action and some of our early impact research. It was nearly 20 years ago, which I probably shouldn't say in a public forum because it starts to show my age. And I joined what was then BBC World Service Trust, as we were known, on a 1-year secondment from the BBC, from the UK government. And I think it was in my first or maybe my second week, and I remember listening to a presentation about impact. First, I remember hearing how programming on, it was actually about leprosy in Brazil, had driven a huge spike in daily calls to a national helpline, information helpline after the broadcast. So not too dissimilar to some of the spikes that we've seen here in the UK, for example, after the national calls to the National Domestic Abuse Helpline here, after the Archers storyline that people may remember on a really powerful storyline on domestic abuse. And I remember thinking, wow, you know, this stuff really works. And the second example I remember seeing was a clip of what was a new medical drama called Taste of Life in Cambodia. And it was pretty groundbreaking at the time because there'd been no Khmer language drama on television in Cambodia. So there was only really dubbed, imported dramas coming in from places like South Korea. And it was pioneering because it was really about supporting a young production team trained to use sort of local storytelling and reflect local stories, relationships, love relationships, all the things that drama manages to do and to engage audiences and entertain, but also cover critical issues affecting audiences. And as well as the clip of the drama on those very early days when I joined, I remember watching a testimony. And it was from a mother who explained that she knew that she had to take her child to the hospital as she recognised that he had acute respiratory infection. And just for context, at that point, that was probably the biggest killer of under fives in Cambodia at the time. And it was because one of her favourite characters in Tastes of Life hadn't taken their child to the hospital in time. And the third presentation I remember seeing was showing some data, comparing exposed audiences to those who weren't exposed. I think it was on a knowledge issue that the content was trying to cover. And I remember thinking, aren't we at risk of comparing apples and pears here? Those who watch are likely to be very different to those that don't. And if we don't overcome this inherent self-selecting bias, we're not going to be able to demonstrate the impact of the content. And to really demonstrate this public interest content can inspire change. And at that moment, I think I realised I probably wasn't going back to the civil service. I was completely hooked. And hopefully some of the content you'll see today, you'll have a sense of why. And that's what our research team has been doing ever since. So we're inspired by a BBC value, a value that many of you probably heard, that audiences are at the heart of everything we do. And it makes sense then for BBC's international charity to put audience research at the heart of everything we do. And we do that to ensure that our work represents underrepresented voices and stories, supports public interest journalism, the type of journalism that we so need, and Carl was talking about this afternoon, I should say, and to contribute to healthy public debate and healthy media ecosystems. We and others have demonstrated that high-quality content and storytelling, informed by evidence on critical social issues, can fill knowledge gaps, can spark conversations, promote accountability, inspire individual and collective action, and even save lives. And that's what we've been doing ever since, in that we made, for example, the first reality TV programme in Bangladesh on climate change, and possibly globally, about 10 years ago. It reached 16 million people. Our research, and it was really trying to demonstrate how people can adapt to increased climate risks that our audiences were telling us that they were facing. Our research helped to identify how that worked. For example, through two key pathways. One, increasing awareness of those climate risks, which in turn drove action, and supporting higher self and collective efficacy. Another example, last year we published an article in the prestigious British Medical Journal that demonstrated that short content delivered direct to families' phones using IVR can save nearly 14,000 lives. Today, the team, Benedek, Mahdi and Tania, are going to give you 3 examples of how we think about impact. They're aligning with our new impact areas, and we've marked our milestone anniversary of 25 years with a new strategy. When we were formed in 1999, our remit was to promote high-quality journalism and use entertainment media to address social issues at scale. Those issues and today we still see that that's a really important role, that we need to support free and independent media and leverage storytelling as a force for good. And that's why, working with our local media partners around the world, we will increasingly focus on what we call the 3 Ds: information disorder, division, and distrust. Our activities are going to stay the same, so we're going to continue to support our local media partners through media development. We're going to continue to support content creation and local creatives. We're going to continue to do audience research, and we're going to continue to work on media policy. But going forward, we'll focus on 3 impact areas where we think that media content can have the greatest impact. They are stronger democracies, a safer, more habitable planet, and more inclusive societies. So let's hear more, and I'm going to pass over to Benedict. Hopefully the sound will all work for us.
I hope as well. I think you can hear me, but please let me know if not. You can hear me. Thank you. Thanks, Anna, for the intro. I'll now talk about a project that came under the More Habitable Planet and Stronger Democracies impact areas, which was Kembali ke Hutan, or Return to the Forest in Indonesia. This project aimed to engage young urban Indonesians on issues around green growth and to open spaces in the media sector for climate conversations. Indonesia is home to some of the largest tropical rainforests in the world with incredible biodiversity. It is also the world's third largest emitter of greenhouse gases, greatly driven by deforestation, and has one of the highest rates of climate change deniers. As countries do at climate summits, Indonesia committed to reduce its emissions substantially by 2030. But looking at environmental issues young people care about in the country, we knew that deforestation and climate change and CO2 emissions were at the very bottom of this list. This suggested that without better public engagement on climate change, hence popular demand for action on it, Indonesia's growth was unlikely to be greener and to meet reduction targets. Therefore, our project's goal was to galvanize engagement among urban youth with media content, including storytelling that offered authentic voices and was identity relevant. We kicked off our work with formative research, as we do in all our projects, which in this case culminated in a segmentation study based on online behaviors and engagement with green themes that identified the 6 segments you can see on the right hand of the screen. We used these segments to craft storylines and to develop characters. For instance, our lead character, Bodo, at the start of the drama is a daydreamer without real concern for the environment, representing the regular consumer segment, which is one of the biggest ones. But due to flooding, Bodo needs to leave Jakarta and move back to his village. And over time there, he engages with environmental issues, which is facilitated by his love interest, Tuji, a representative of the ethical consumer and the quiet hero segments. Eventually, Bodo contests and wins the local election on a sustainable development mandate. So Kembali ke Hutan, if you flick to the next slide, its media content had 3 pillars. The first was the one I was describing just now, an award-winning drama show called Cerita Kita, which means Our Stories in Bahasa, which was broadcast on SCTV, one of the leading channels in the country. The second was Gobrolin Cerita Kita, meaning chatter of Our Stories, a social media discussion program on Instagram. And the third and last was Our Action, Aksi Kita, a multi-platform digital brand. From our evaluative research, we know that these media outputs generated a really strong reach. 24.5 million people watched the TV show or the social media content, which is 17% of the target audience. And the brands were recalled by 35 million people, which is over 10 million more than those who actually viewed it, which really suggests high media visibility and an ability of the content to generate discussion, which was one of our main goals. In the same study, we found that 65% of the viewers named actions they had taken as a result of viewing the content. For example, 55% mentioned minimizing food waste, 10% mentioned participating in environmental groups. But we knew that relying on self-reports from this group was weak without a comparison to non-viewers who proceeded to make a comparison between the exposed and the unexposed, which also suggested that those who viewed were more likely to have discussed environmental issues in the last month and to have taken action compared to those that hadn't viewed Cerita Kita, Gobrolin, or Aksi Kita. But such associations still come from a research design that's unable to support causal inference due to the self-selection problem mentioned earlier by Anna. So to support causal inference, we partnered with Columbia University to conduct an experiment. In this experiment, participants were randomly assigned to one of 2 groups. The treatment, in which they watched 4 episodes of Cerita Kita and Gobrolin, approximately 2 hours worth, and a control group in which they watched a drama and a discussion program that didn't have any climate content. Here again, in this randomized control trial or experiment, we found positive impacts. We found impressive knowledge gains, which you can see on the screen. Those who watched Cerita Kita were more likely to discern the relationship between beef farming and water shortages, deforestation and flooding, and food waste and methane emissions in the country. But they were also more motivated to publicly discuss climate change. They had more confidence in understanding deforestation's effects. They supported more the media coverage of climate change and had higher support for the Indonesian government's climate pledge at the Glasgow COP, something that the program didn't even address directly. 5 months after this experiment, we went back to the same participants to re-administer the same questionnaire, and we found that without further engagement with the content, the knowledge gains of the Cerita Kita group were still significantly higher than that of the controls. The results on the other measures had dissipated over time, which didn't surprise us immensely given the initial exposure was barely 2 hours of content. These results leave us with the question whether sustained engagement with the content can support sustained impact, something that we can hopefully investigate soon in the future. And with that, I will hand over to Mahdi, who will talk about another aspect of a more habitable planet.
Thank you so much, Benedek. BBC Media Action has a long history in Afghanistan working on important issues including governance, peace, health and COVID-19, nutrition, and food security, mine awareness, and supporting local media to produce content on these issues. We have a research team present in all provinces of the country conducting important research on the information needs of communities to help our local media partners, and we share these insights with humanitarian organizations and other stakeholders to help them in their work in Afghanistan. And very recently, we have been conducting a lot of research on misinformation and disinformation in the Afghanistan media landscape. We look into how misinformation and disinformation is being shared among Afghan audiences and what has been the impact of these misinformation, disinformation on the lives of Afghans. Today I will focus on our mine awareness work in Afghanistan. As you all know, the country is one of the most mined countries in the world. On average, 110 civilians are killed since 1989 or injured by landmines each month, and 89% of those are children. With funding from UNMAS and Hello Trust, we implemented a mine awareness project in Afghanistan. And before the start of the project, we conducted a formative research that showed that some levels of knowledge existed in the communities about the explosives, but it mainly came from their lived experiences, and few had received reliable information from public interest media. And the content that were being produced did not focus on children, but the children were the most at risk. So what we did was we produced audio and video content and shared them through the best ways that we thought we could reach audiences. It included from TV PSS to radio drama and discussion programs to IVR content for nomadic Kushis to social media and passenger buses. I always highlight the passenger buses because this was one of the best platforms we could use. With the ending of the war in Afghanistan, lots of people would travel from between cities or in different parts of the country, and some of them or most of them did not know about mines, and we used these passenger buses to actually play them some informative content, and it actually helped them understand the risks of the mines. So these helped us reach over 5 million Afghans in the country. Now I'll play one of the public service announcements that we shared on TV and social media, and we reached over 10 million Facebook users through this short PSA.
استاذ موش است؟ نه خرگوش است.
برو خرگوشک.
استاد شتر است شتر.
آفرین.
استاد از چی جر شده؟
صدا داره. استاد نرم است یا سخت؟ استادی یک چیز جاندار است.
جاندار نیست اما جان میگیره. استاد مرمی هوان است.
آفرین امانولا براستی که اول نمراستی اینه عکسش ببینین ای و دیگراش هم مثل اصلیش زیاد خطرناک است.
خدا شما را به او را برا نکنه. اگر دیدش نه دست بزنی نه دور پرتش و نه به سنگ بزنش.
خواهی چی کنیم؟
دیدی دور شو خبر کن.
آفرین بچه بگه چی کنیم؟
دیدی دور شو خبر کن.
We use the TFL seed, yeah, and it really worked in Afghanistan. What we did to evaluate the impact of our content, we conducted a panel study in the 10 most vulnerable provinces of Afghanistan. We recruited about 400 men and women across these 10 provinces. We conducted a baseline in April 2022. Where we try to understand the existing knowledge, attitudes, discussion, and actions around explosives. We then conducted the end line in August the same year to measure any shifts in these areas through exposure to our programs. During the monitoring period, we followed up with our participants every 2 weeks to understand their exposure to our content, but we did not encourage them to listen to our program or to watch our program on the TV stations that were broadcasting our content. The study's goal was to actually see if those exposed to our content had increased knowledge or discussion or intention for safer behaviors or safer actions. In our POT model, we tested this and found that the more people were exposed to our content, the safer their intentions became when they faced any explosives. But the part to the safer intention actually came through the increased discussion, as you can see the top right there. So this was a very brief summary of our work in Afghanistan. Now our colleague Tania will walk you through briefly about the mine awareness project in Ukraine and discuss some about other projects. Thank you.
Thank you, Mahdi. Thank you for this important and interesting work. So, unfortunately, Afghanistan is not only country heavily mined. 30% of Ukrainian territories are mined, and this has implications not only for daily lives of Ukrainians and Ukrainian economy, but also for global food security, as a lot of mined territories, it's agricultural fields. This is why in 2023 and 2024 we are supporting local media partners to produce and disseminate important content to increase mine awareness. We piloted the content with experimental design, the same method as Benedek already mentioned for Indonesia, so I will not spend a lot of time for methodology. And but what we would like to measure, we would like to pretest this content before our partners put it on air, just to understand whether it has impact on our audience or not. And we asked the same questions for both those who had watched our content and those who had not. And we asked them whether they knew what to do if they encountered a suspicious object and whether they knew which number to call. We asked a lot of many other questions, but this is just an example to give you their understanding. We found, for example, that one of our public service announcements, this is, was a 28% increase in people knowing what to do when they face a mine, and 67% increase in people remembering the phone number to call. We learned that content needed to be simple, clear, and unified. This is why the message Stop, Don't Touch, Call 101 worked. This is just one example, but today I would like to focus more of another area of work, systematic impact on the media ecosystem in Ukraine. We work with many different independent media in Ukraine with our partners, and we support them to produce different kinds of content. For example, for one of our partner, we support to produce their investigative journalist piece to tackle Russian mis and disinformation in Ukraine, which is a big issue, and we use not traditional ways. I mean, at the rule, this is not very broader audience to appeal, and we support our partner to include some elements of humor to grab the attention and to increase their engagement. And this has a good result. Another direction of work, we are working a lot with Suspilne, which is the Ukrainian public service broadcaster, the same as BBC in the UK, which is the youngest public service broadcaster in Europe. And we are doing a lot of projects, but recently we support the commissioning of 2 series of documentary films that supports inclusion. The films was informed by a large research project on gender and LGBTQI+ communities in Ukraine, looking at the experiences and portrayals of and attitudes towards women and LGBTQI+ communities. We surveyed 1,500 women in Ukraine and 200 women in occupied territories, used focus groups, expert interviews, and AI-driven content analysis to understand the situation, what is going on with gender roles in Ukraine. So we learned that women are feeling the acute impact on their mental and physical health, especially young women, and especially internally displaced women, IDPs. As IDPs, many lost their jobs, faced difficulties finding new employment, and struggle with integrating in the new community. I know this not only as a researcher, but as a Ukrainian who was also IDP in the first months of the war. Leaving home to protect their children, often without men, reinforced gender roles, as women took a dual parental responsibilities. While the war exacerbated women burdens, their issues have become less of priority amidst the focus on death and challenges men faced on the front line. At the same time, women have demonstrated incredible strength, courage, and leadership. Women and men generally support women participating in the war, for example, by joining the military or volunteering, but more conservative gender attitudes are evident. For example, women are still seen by many as bereginya. This means guardian of the home, his, especially by women. While there is strong sense of national unity in Ukraine, there was an awareness that men are elevated. They are heroes, they are fighting, and especially in media and by media. This has the possibility to entrench gender stereotypes for the future, and women themselves stated this. This research inspired a number of different films which say their stories of women haven't been told before in the media. And in this case, we are not only mirror, but also mover to change these gender roles in the society. I would like to show you just a small piece, just to give you this flavor, what kind of stories. It will just a part because of the time. Could you please show?
Я вчителька загальноосвітньої школи номер 9. Я цю школу дуже любила. І люблю до сих пір. І я за нею буду боротися до кінця. Я жінка-воїн в душі. ключ я зберігла від кабінету. Спочатку я його віддала, а потім думаю, ні. Тому що це як домівка моя. Оце мій кабінет англійської мови, але двері вже приросли. Заходьте. Я завжди мріяла бути вчителькою. Мета – це дати щось корисне дітям, навіть не з англійської, щоб виховати людину з великої букви і все.
Ми давно не бачили з Оленою Валеріївною, дуже сумуємо, справді. Уроки з Оленою Валеріївною були такі вільні, якісь ми там могли щось малювати, вирізати. Все було дуже цікаво і повчально.
Я намагалася поєднувати, щоб і мову вивчали, і патріотичне виховання. Я запрошувала чоловіка, який військовий на той час був. І хлопці дуже полюбляли, коли чоловік приходив на наші заходи.
Останній урок 23 лютого ми говорили, що скоро війна почнеться.
І я їм казала, мені здається, я казала, що я не вірю, що це буде. Ми прокинулися від вибухів. Я схопилася за телефон, почала читати інтернет. І я кажу, Руслан, війна, нам оголосили війну.
Росія здійснила удари по нашій військовій.
Руслан зразу мені сказав, я йду тоді. І я сказала, я з тобою. Сказали указівки жінок не брати. Я поспілкувалася спочатку з начштабом, він каже, поспілкуйтеся з комбатом.
Thank you. This is a sad story, but it is a story of courage and leadership. Unfortunately, the man of this woman died on the front line, but she's continue fighting. And we created different stories, not only about woman fighter, but also about woman volunteer or medical worker, and also about gay couples who are fighting on the front line, just to show that life is different and women and different people can have different experience and different roles. But as well as films, this work much more about production support on the gender-inclusive content and sharing the research on changing gender roles with media organizations across Ukraine to inspire them to create more content. And now I would like to focus not on the content of individual films, but the content on the media ecosystem. About the strategic shifts which we can see because of our projects. Last year, for example, inspired by our projects, Suspilne public broadcaster in Ukraine signed 50-50 initiative, their equality project. Started in the BBC's London newsroom in 2017. This initiative aims to inspire and support production teams in BBC and worldwide to create media that fairly represents our world. The 50-50 system helps content makers easily track the diversity in content in both who creates the content and whom this content represents. In addition, Suspilne continue to produce films on social inclusion without our project. One of these films was recognized with an award in the Inclusive Film Festival in Ukraine. Suspilne has also gone to create department for social important content. So they continue this work without the support of the project, and we believe that, for example, 50-50 initiative has much more impact than 15 films. The audience trust is also growing, which is a good indicator. So, while as a researcher I'm not drawing the causal inference here, it does speak to more systematic way to inspire change that we believe warrant future research. Thank you so much for listening.
A huge thank you to the BBC Media Impact team there. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk us through all of that. I'm quite conscious of time, so does anyone have any sort of burning questions for the team? And we can maybe just take one or two and then move on to our final session.
It's more a comment inviting a little more information than a question, but I was really taken by the finding that work that you showed on buses that inspired discussion, the impact was via discussion rather than directly from the screen or audio production itself. It was the discussion it elicited. I thought that was a fantastically important finding, and I don't know if you or anyone else in the room wants to tell us more about that.
I mean, I'll just briefly mention, and then maybe Mahdi come into it. Well, actually, Mahdi, you start, because it's Afghanistan, and then I'll open it up wider. Go for it.
Yeah, it was interesting for us because people often speak about, in Afghanistan, as I said, is one of the most mined countries. People often would speak about the victims of the mines, but they would not speak about how to avoid these risks or how to practice safer actions. What our program actually did was to actually, in a way, to shift the discussion among communities to avoiding those risks or avoiding becoming victims rather than discussing the victims themselves. So we believe it has really helped the communities to avoid those risks, and then most importantly to encourage the families to speak about these risks, about these items with their children. As you saw, the clip showed actually the children playing with the mine. Our formative research actually found that there were different groups of people who were at risk, and children were at most risk because they either played with the mines, or it was a fun for them, or it was out of curiosity, or it was just that childhood show off to their peers that, yeah, I am that brave that I can play. But there's another sad thing to it, which is that a lot of children are collecting scrap metals, and sometimes they cannot identify if it is risk-free or it is a mine that can threaten their lives. So we, through these PSAs, one of our focus was to actually focus the children to help them avoid those risks, and also encourage their families, their parents, to talk to their children about the risks of the mines.
The only thing I would just add is that I think consistently across a lot of our work, we're finding that when we get audiences talking about issues, particularly issues that aren't discussed very much, or when people see programming that's about people like me. So we've taken debate formats, for example, to Afghanistan, previously to places like Bangladesh, and having people see content that they recognize creates discussion. And I think what we've learned is that's a really powerful predictor for whether people feel that they can play a role individually or collectively. I'll stop there.
Thank you so much. I think we'll need to wrap it up, but just another huge round of applause, and thank you so much for coming to join us today.